Today, we're going to talk with Sarah Li Cain about money mindsets and the stories we tell ourselves. Sarah went from broke to six figures after hitting rock bottom and deciding to change her relationship with money. She's willing to share that journey with us. Let's meet Sarah. Welcome to Richer Soul, Sarah.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's always great to have guests who have so much to share and so much experience. And today, I think we're going to talk a little bit about financial mindsets, those stories in our head and those voices that prevent us from doing what we want, and some of those relationships that we create with money that are probably irrational and prevent us from living the life we want to lead. And I know you have a story about an aha moment where you came to grips, I guess, with your money scripts. Would you be willing to share that with us today?
Sure. So this happened when I just graduated college. So I had an opportunity to move from Canada to Australia to work. And so I obviously accepted. I was actually with an ex-boyfriend at the time. And when I told him, he said, okay, well, I'm going to move with you. So I immediately felt the pressure to take care of him financially while he was, moving across the world for me, trying to get another job, et cetera, et cetera. Long story short, we were there for almost a year, and I pretty much took care of him financially. So I paid for, I don't really know the exact percentage, but probably 90% of everything. So the rent, groceries, we went on road trips around Australia and New Zealand. I paid for pretty much all of those. After about almost a year, I decided to move back to Canada to get a grown-up job and buy a house, and I thought I was going to marry this person. Then when I moved back about 2 weeks later, he broke up with me, and I checked my credit card statement, and I found myself $9,000 in credit card debt.
Not a great place to be at all.
No.
So what did you do at that point? You're $9,000 in debt, your boyfriend walks out on you, and what happened?
So the very first thing that I did, I just really shamed myself. It was a lot of, how could you do this? You are smarter than this, Sarah. How could you be so stupid? A lot of those internal scripts that I just kept saying over and over again. And at that point, I had nowhere to live. So I really had to ask my parents, can I move back in with you until I figure out what's going on? And at that point, they didn't even know I was in debt. No one knew I was in debt. They all assumed I was still together with this boyfriend of mine. And I was pretty depressed. I'm not going to lie. And so I remember sitting in a bedroom I was in, it looked the same since high school. And I pulled out a Dalai Lama book at that point, and I just started reading it. And I think I read it in about a day or two, and it really opened my eyes because I realized that what I was doing with my money was I was chasing this ideal relationship that was never going to happen. So, in other words, I was chasing this fantasy. And so I realized then that I had to get out of that mindset, whatever it took. I had to just do whatever it took to make money at the time and take it one step from there. So about a few days later, I literally walked down to the mall where I used to work at when I was in college, walked into the restaurant where I worked, and asked the manager for my job back, and he said yes. And then I went back to the Gap. I used to work there in college as well, and I asked if I can work there again, and they said yes. So I just started working minimum wage jobs, trying to save up some money and figure out my next steps from there.
You said a couple things. One, it's about taking baby steps. So taking at least one step forward. In this case, you took a very small step. You're starting at the bottom at this point with minimum wage, and it's almost like starting over. At least you're taking action, which is important, and you continue to build from there. So what happens next? You have these two minimum wage jobs. You're starting to figure out things. That's still not, to me, there's got to be a bigger mindset shift here that's occurring, because that's not enough to do what you've done. What else occurred at that point?
It was, to be honest, it was a lot of shifting from how could I be so stupid to it was something that I just did that thought would make me happy at the time. It's a very subtle shift, but it made an absolutely huge impact on moving forward. Because once I came to terms with that, that was really much easier than to forgive myself for what had happened. When I kept saying, "How are you so stupid? How could you do this? You grew up in a family full of accountants. You should know how to manage your money." The more I kept spiraling to that whole shame cycle, the less willing I was to get the minimum wage jobs, the less willing I was to apply to other jobs or to figure out how to save money. And so that was really the big shift for me. It was a lot of little things that I did that, gosh, snowballed into so much more into, where I am today. For example, one of the next step I took was actually going back overseas to teach. And so for me, I was really stuck on staying in Canada that whole time. And when I talked to my friend, she said, why not go for a year? You can save money overseas. You get an apartment provided for you if you get this teaching contract. There's really nothing tying you in Canada at this point. You're surrounded by places where it reminds you of your ex-boyfriend. Why not just go? And when she said that, I'm like, you're right. And so the next step was then applying to this job in South Korea, and I got it. And I thought, okay, let's see what happens. That was another mindset shift too, is let's see where this takes me. Let's see where this opportunity takes me. Instead of being stuck in, I'm so ashamed of myself. I can't believe I did this. And so, yeah, I went to South Korea and ended up being overseas for 10 years after, or no, 9 years after that.
Now, that's a pretty big shift. And I think sometimes we have to do that. We have to change our space we're in. In other words, if you're in a space that's not supportive, that reminds you of failure, then you've got to get out of that space and get into a space that creates opportunity and that gives you the ability to take another step forward. And you talked about the snowball, which the snowball reminds me of the compound interest curve in the sense that it starts so teeny and you just keep growing little by little by little. And over time, it brings about massive change. So you spent 10 years abroad. It created a low cost of living lifestyle. And that low cost of living lifestyle allowed you to save large sums of money, which give you a base to do something bigger. So one of the things that you talked to me about was that pleasing others made you broke. It didn't make you happy. And I think a lot of us probably do that. We spend money to make other people happy instead of ourselves. And I think that appears in a lot of different ways. One of the most simplest is just trying to keep up with neighbors or society and be popular because you think that makes you happy. But you learned that lesson pretty early on.
Yes. And I think after he broke up with me, I remember being really angry too at one point. I said, I'm never, ever going to let something like this happen to me again. I'm never going to let somebody take advantage of me. And then through a series of just being really frugal, like not going out to dinner, not going out to Starbucks, things like that, I discovered that there were certain friends in my life that were taking advantage of me. And so it was through those very subtle things that had happened where I would say, oh no, I can't go to the mall today, or oh no, I don't have the money to go out and eat. I really saw some of their true colors. And unfortunately, some of my friendships had ended as a result, but it was really good to know because I feel like if I hadn't discovered the fact that these people were taking advantage of me, or I felt like I had to do certain things in social situations, I probably wouldn't, A, be less stressed, be happier, and B, probably be a lot more broke than I am now.
And that's a very difficult thing to do, is to say no to friends. Did you find new friends, or did you just change the way that you created relationships with your friends?
So for me, it was really difficult because I had relied on my friends a lot for support. And what had really happened, again, another mindset shift was that I felt like, well, if I'm going to go travel, I'm going to go overseas, I'm going to South Korea, I'm going to meet new people. And I may not be able to keep in touch with the people back home. And, if I'm losing friendships in Canada, then it's okay because there's so many more people I'm going to meet wherever I go to. And so when I thought of it that way, it was a lot easier to let go of some of the things and the people that really didn't, serve me. And I had met so many more great friends as a result of that.
So it sounds like throughout life, you're constantly making these small mindset shifts. And as you make the mindset shifts that are somewhat limiting beliefs, it opens up so much more opportunity. And then that leads to abundance. And you have that ability to do that. That's not easy. I think a lot of people just get stuck with, I can't, I won't, this isn't allowed. They seem to want to have somebody give them permission on how to live their life instead of just living it to be happy. How did you, I know we talked about that before. How do you have this ability to say, you know what, I'm just going to live my life to be happy and not worry about what others think or ask permission to do something?
I attribute that, to be honest, a lot with my mom. She was always a pretty free spirit. She had always been very headstrong and always encouraged me to do what I thought was best for me. She may not have agreed with a lot of my decisions. she'll let me know, but she's always, said, I will support you no matter what. If you are down in the dumps, come back and move in. We'll take care of you until you get back on your feet. So I've always known I had that support system, and I always really viewed different parts of my life as an experiment, if that makes sense. When I went to South Korea, it was an experiment to see, can I do this on my own for a year? Because I had always wanted to live on my own. And so being in South Korea gave me that opportunity to live on my own, to have my own apartment, to travel wherever I please. And so that's what I did. And then when I went to China to live for a few years, that was an experiment to see, can I live in a country that doesn't speak English primarily? Can I survive that for 2 years? And that ended up being 8. And I remember meeting my husband. It was an experiment. It was, well, am I ready for another serious relationship? Let's see where this goes. And then it turned into obviously a much more serious relationship than just casually dating. And so that's really what it is. I think that for people who want to do this, I don't want people to think that all of the things that have happened to me happen all at once. This is a big transition for 10 years. And it just takes one little small decision that you make, and then you consistently do that small thing until 10 years later, you're like, wow, I have $1 million in the bank, or I've traveled to every country, or whatever it is that you consciously made the decision to do.
And that comes back to what we talked about before with the snowball, is you make a decision and then you just take a step. It's an experiment. It's okay if you fail. If you fail, you knew going in that you were going to try something. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. And I think that's even difficult for people to grasp, is because we all worry about, well, what if I fail? What if this doesn't work out? Along that way, though, I'm sure that there were probably a couple of failures.
Yes.
Would you be willing? I think people need to see that. Too often, with the current social media and everything, everyone sees perfect. Nobody sees that underneath that perfection are all the scars and the mistakes. What are some of, I know you started with the big mistake. Were there some others, though, along the way that you'd be willing to share with us today?
Sure. I think one of the biggest mistakes was not investing earlier. I think when I had moved to South Korea, my main goal at that point was just hoard as much money as I could. And I think it was more, I was afraid of not seeing the money and not trusting myself enough to learn about personal finance and more things to grow my income. I think at that point I was so focused on just paying down the debt, trying to recover from the heartache and things like that. I never focused more on the future. And I think that was, in retrospect, I feel like even if I just put in $50 a month towards something, I would feel a lot more secure in the future. And I think that, I accumulated a lot of cash, and I realized, after I think I moved to the US that I could have done something with it. So that was definitely a mistake. The second one was, I think that when I got out of debt, there were still a lot of spending habits that weren't very positive. So I would still go impulse shopping and I would overspend on certain things. I mean, I had the money. That wasn't the problem. It was more, why were these habits still here? And I didn't really take the time to think about them or try to figure a way to be more productive with those negative habits, turn them into something more positive. And so that took another couple of years to really figure those out and to be better with that.
And how did you overcome the negative habits? If somebody wanted to do that, if they looked at their life and they said, okay, I'm impulse shopping, how does somebody then overcome that habit? Or how do they even realize that? Because first you have to have the realization that you have the habit. And then how do you go about changing the habit?
So the first thing I would suggest is to not deprive yourself. So let's say you are a big lover of shoes and you spend a lot on shoes, then don't immediately say, I'm going to stop buying shoes. That doesn't work for 99% of the population out there. You're going to end up being really resentful towards yourself and the money and the shopping ban, whatever you want to call it. And you're probably going to then end up buying more shoes. It's almost like yo-yo dieting. So I think the first thing is to really figure out, and this is really hard, I'm not going to lie about this is really hard, is figure out what emotional need did that fill? Like, what were the reasons that you developed this habit, or why don't you want to have this habit anymore? So an example, I went through a experiment where I got rid of huge record collection, and a lot of things kept popping up about my identity. And I had associated my identity with these records, and that was a really difficult thing to realize. So I was filling an emotional need based on the fact that I didn't think I was cool enough to make friends of my own. I had to have certain things that I surrounded myself with. So that was, for example, a realization. So once you come to that, then you need to figure out what positive thing you can replace it with. So don't just say, I'm going to stop shopping or I'm going to stop XYZ. I'm going to replace XYZ with something else. And so then you're turning it from, I have this terrible willpower or I'm not good enough, to I'm empowering myself to do something that's positive, whatever that is. And so if you shift it that way, then it'll be much easier then to change it or to get rid of it.
In essence, you need to fill the gap. If I'm going to stop doing X, then I need to plan and be intentional of what I'm going to do to replace that so that I can still have those positive feelings and the rewards that I want, but I don't need to find it in that particular way.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Very nice. So now you've spent a lot of time living abroad, and I think for most people in the U.S., it's outside of their mindset and scope to even consider that. But living abroad in a much lower cost of living area allows you to build up a great capital base. The two countries that you mentioned were South Korea and China. Have you been in any other countries abroad?
Other than Australia, I've traveled to quite a few, but those are the three main ones that I have lived in. And with the exception of Australia, China and South Korea has significantly lower standards of living than in the US.
And because they have lower standards of living, how is living there? I mean, was it still enjoyable, or because you're dealing with a completely different kind of cultural model?
So it really depends on who you work for as well. So in South Korea, it was pretty easy. I was almost spoiled. I lived in an apartment. They had rented it for me, so I never had to deal with the landlord or contracts. So if I had ever had an issue, I would just let one of the staff members know at the school and they would take care of it. They would pay the bills for me. I never saw a single bill. They would just give me a pay slip every month and they would say, this is your salary. This is how much was taken out for electricity and water. And then they would show me the actual bill, so I knew that they weren't lying. I never paid for internet in South Korea because the Wi-Fi there is just incredible. This was 9 years ago, and I could walk down the street and I would have 10 different Wi-Fi signals, and I would never need to pay for any of it. So that was really incredible. As far as comforts, you can definitely get a lot of the comforts you would get in the US. You're going to be paying a little bit more, but it really evens out because I think I was paying maybe $1 or $2 for a meal, and this was eating out at local restaurants. I think if you went to TGI Fridays, it was $5 a meal. So if you think about it, you're not paying rent. I wasn't really paying for transportation because I lived across the street from where I worked. Buses were 50 cents. Food was minimal. Yeah, I mean, I enjoyed it. I think it really depends as well, your sense of adventure, if you're willing to step a little bit outside of your comfort zone to live in a different country. But if you're not, then it might be a lot more difficult of a time than I did.
Well, it's definitely a challenge. And how was it in China? Was it the same or was it a little different there?
It was more difficult because of different culture there, and it was a lot more difficult because I wasn't really living in a place where English was widely spoken. In South Korea, I got away with not speaking Korean because a lot of people in Seoul, which was the city I was in, spoke English enough where I could get by. In China, you really had to know the language. You know, if you were getting a taxi or things like that, you had to know where you were going. And for the most part, I'd say most people were friendly there, but there were a few that weren't quite as nice and would try to take advantage of you. And so unfortunately, those times, it was pretty frustrating. But I think if you, again, work for a really good employer, then they'll have some really great staff members who are willing to take you under the wing and walk you around. And, again, if you have a sense of adventure, then you should be fine.
All right. Well, that's quite interesting. I don't know if I have that much of a sense of adventure.
Actually, I probably do. It's just, it's different, and I guess you have to be intentional and say, I'm going to try this and go do it.
And there's, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was to say there's also the great advantage too is that a lot of expats understand where people are coming from. So for me, I took a lot of expats under my wing because I knew how scary it was the very first time I landed in China, and trying to find where things are, even navigating to the IKEA to get furniture. And so you're going to have a lot of those people who are willing to take you around for the day, or you can call them and say, I need XYZ, where do I buy it? So there's a lot of tight-knit communities like that are willing to help. And so it makes it a lot easier to transition.
Absolutely. It's funny because you're mentioning all these brand names and they're all the ones that we're familiar with here in the U.S. So it's really not all that much different, I guess, when you're abroad.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're back in the U.S. and you're creating your own income streams here at this point, right? You don't have you're doing your own types of businesses.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work out? You also have a kid, which is difficult in itself. How do you make all of that happen back home now?
Oh my goodness. So it was really hard in the beginning. I'm not going to lie. For those out there who are parents and work from home, it's definitely difficult. The very first thing I really had to do was be really adamant about what I had wanted. Like, do I want to grow a blog? Do I want to have a freelance writing business? What are my absolute priorities? And once I figured that out, then all the unimportant things kind of go away. And that's really hard because you feel like you want to do everything all at one time, and it's just not possible, and even less possible with a young child. So I focused on two major things, which was growing my blog and doing the content marketing business. And once I got that, break down your tasks. I broke down my tasks, like what were quote unquote deep tasks and what were tasks that if I got distracted by my son, for example, I could go back to easily. So for example, those would be social media posting. Deep work tasks would be writing a book or writing a blog post or filming a video. And then I would just then schedule deep work tasks for times when he's napping or he's in daycare twice a week now. So those days are heavy writing days. And then every other day when he's home, I would do those tasks that it's okay if I get distracted or if they don't get done. I don't feel so bad then. And I think it's just, you have to find a groove, figure out a system, and then test it out. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, what can you tweak? So I'm always really refining what I'm doing and finding out what works best, because, what has worked for me last month isn't working for me at all this month. I have to redo a lot of it.
And so I'm hearing some underlying things there. First, you have to know your purpose. You have to define, what is it that I want to do? Because until you know what it is that's important and what you're working towards, it becomes difficult to decide, what do I need to do next? Once you have that bigger purpose and you say, this is what I'm going to do, then you can create the task list. And when you look at the task list, you can say, what's important, what's not so important. We talk about the 80-20 rule, where 20% of your time produces 80% of the results. It sounds like you figured out what that 20% is, and you're spending your time working on the most important things. And then if things don't exactly go as planned, then you take a step back, you refine, you figure out, you experiment, and you go back again and you do it. It's good to I love to show how people are actually following these steps and that they work, and how there are so many very different ways to do things like that. And it sounds like you're doing a great job with that.
Thank you. Well, there are days when nothing gets done. I think anybody out there with a toddler will understand. There are days, and I just have to be realistic about what I can do. And it's funny, that we're talking about this. Last night I actually had a conversation with my husband. I was, staring at my screen at 7:30 at night. And I finally said this. My husband nodded his head very vigorously. I said, I think I just crammed too much in a day. I think I'm almost too ambitious with what I can do in a day. And he looks at me like, I've been trying to tell you that for a long time, Sarah. So there are days when even I try to do too much and I wear myself out. So, even though I have a system going, it doesn't always mean it works. And you just have to be really ruthless and realistic about what you can and cannot do.
True. I think and this is true of everyone, we overestimate what we can do in a day, and we underestimate what we can do over 3 or 5 or 10 years. As you said, it took you 10 years to build your thing. And then you look back and go, wow. But then on the day-to-day, we overestimate. We think we can get so much done, and we can't. It's all the little baby steps that continue to get you from one little place to the next. And that plays out in everyone's life.
Yeah, and one thing that I've done with work, and it actually can apply to money goals as well, is sit down for 15, 20 minutes every week. I like to do it in the morning because no one's awake yet, and just literally write down everything you did that week. And so I would write down for business just all my tasks that I've done. And you'd be surprised at how much you've accomplished. And when you see that list, you're not going to feel so bad, because I think we're always feeling like we have to chase the next thing. Once we're done a task, we're doing the next one, or, once we pay off a debt, we're thinking about the next one, or whatever it is. We don't really take the time to sit and think, what have I actually done? And in a week, a lot can happen in a week. And then you'd sit down for a month, in a month, and write down everything you've accomplished in a month. You're going to be really surprised. And I think all of us, and myself included, we just have to remind ourselves that we're doing the best that we can. Even though we don't think we've accomplished anything, we're still doing what we're doing the best that we can. And so if you can reflect on it and see what you've done, it becomes much easier then to move forward, and it becomes much easier to trust yourself when it comes to accomplishing bigger things.
Overcoming ourselves is one of the most difficult things that we need to do.
We talk a little bit about this. When you're climbing a mountain and you keep looking up towards the top of the mountain and you're halfway up, that top still looks so far away and you feel like you're getting nowhere. And too often in life, we don't turn around, as you suggested, and look how far we've come up the mountain. And that's what you sounds like you do on a weekly basis. You sit down, you say, what did I do? And then that shows you success of your week. And when you have success, and success builds on success, you're creating the mindsets of success, and you're living it within there. That's another little nugget in there that helps people to move forward. I looked at your blog, and I know you talk a little bit about how friends cause you to overspend. We need to create the right relationships and make sure that our friends and even family are not causing us to make the wrong money choices. So can you give us a couple of maybe red flags that you might notice of people who may cause us to make money decisions that aren't the smartest?
So one I think is pretty common but very subtle is if you're going out to dinner with a bunch of people and one person or a few people insist on just splitting the bill evenly, if that happens, watch what they order. And I had a friend like that. I didn't really think anything of it at the time, but I would notice she would order more things if we were splitting the bill than if we had separate checks. And I realized that this person was just, to be blunt, a mooch. And so if you notice that behavior, then really watch out how they talk about money around you, and if they start asking you for things, because if they see that they can get something from you or from other people, they're going to push more. So that's definitely one. Another one, which can happen, it happens to me a lot, and it's really difficult sometimes to say no, is if somebody's asking you something in front of a bunch of people because they think that if you're in public, you're not going to say no. So they're almost kind of cornering you or guilting you into something. So an example of that would be if you are, let's say, in the office and you're all pitching together for a birthday present for another coworker, and they're like, oh, can you contribute, $50 towards this gift? And let's say you don't have that money in your budget this month, but they are trying to convince you to do it because, I don't know, for whatever reason, and you're in front of 10 people and you feel really embarrassed and you don't want to say no because you think you look like a jerk. So that's another one. A third one is really family obligations, and that can come in so many different forms. And that's another difficult one too, because you feel like, oh, they're family members, and if they're asking me to do something, then I should do it. Or I feel like I'm obligated to buy them a gift because it's Christmas or whatever other holiday or occasion. So those are all very small things, but they can end up causing you to spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
Absolutely. So you mentioned budget. Do you have a budget, and do you live on a budget? I'll be honest, I don't.
I don't either. So if you're talking about like a traditional budget, no. My husband and I've tried that, and it was a disaster. I'm not going to lie. And it wasn't because we overspent. It was because we felt like we were spying on each other. Because, my husband would go and buy a book, and he thought, oh my gosh, Sarah's going to judge me for buying this book. Or I would go and buy a shirt for my son, and I would think, oh my gosh, he's going to criticize me for how much it costs. So we ended up arguing over certain things, and it wasn't, again, because we didn't have the money. And so what we do now is we just make sure we automatically save a certain amount each month, and then whatever's left over, we make sure the bills are taken care of. And then after that, we sort of, as long as we don't spend more than what's left over, we're okay with it.
And everyone has to figure out a way that works best for them. Are your savings portion, is that automated, or do you every month make a conscious decision to save?
So part of it's automated and part of it is we make a conscious decision. So the reason we do that is because I have variable income, so it really depends on what has come in the month before. So a system that we're trying out, and it's working well so far, is we actually just live on my husband's paycheck, and whatever I make, it goes into savings. So it could be investments, it could be just, rainy day fund, whatever. So it's kind of almost a challenge for me to see how much I can make, to see how much we can save and how soon we can retire. So it's become a game for me in that sense.
And for a lot of people, I think that works. If you turn it into a game and you make it fun, you're more apt to do it and to enjoy it. And then it becomes a challenge. And then it becomes something that everyone kind of gets on board with the challenge. And you don't have these these thoughts of regrets and despair, oh, I have to save, oh, I can't do this, it becomes, hey, I'm building towards something bigger. And so it's another one of those subtle mindset shifts that you can make that allow you to take another step forward.
Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of my friends and people who aren't as immersed in personal finance as I am or you are, we're okay. We understand the terminology. We can explain things in our own words, and we like money, obviously. We're in this industry, right? But for some people who aren't, they feel like they have to know what is a mutual fund or what is this or what's compound interest or that and that. And they feel like they need an quote unquote expert to help them figure this out. And that's not true at all. I don't like it when people think they need permission from somebody else to tell them what to do with their money, because no one's more interested in your money than you are. And if you're just saving $50 a month, you're fine. Don't feel like you're not saving enough, right? Go ahead and figure out, is there a way to save more? Or is this good enough for now because you're paying down debt or whatever? Your situation's different. Don't feel like you have to ask somebody to teach you something if you're just going to feel like they're going to tell you what to do with it.
That's interesting. But I guess at the end of the day, we do need to invest that money.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got to figure that out somehow. Now, and I agree with you. If you're going to have someone else invest your money for you, the natural tendency is for them to invest it in the ways that earn them the most money, not necessarily you. So you have to be careful of that. But people should get a basic financial education. And unfortunately, and I say this all the time, in 12 years, 13 years of schooling, and even with college, and I have an MBA, and across all of that, nobody teaches the basic money skills, which is a shame. Do you have any resources that you might want to recommend for how people can understand the basics of how to manage and invest their money?
Oh, that's a great one. Gosh, I read so many things. I don't know if they're beginners, to be honest. One of my favorite books is Smart Couples Retire Rich, or Finish Rich, I think is David Bach, and The Automatic Millionaire. I think he has some great advice in there. And he talks a lot about something called the values ladder. So really figure out your values and how that works with or how money works with your values, and what's your goal with earning and saving. And he talks a lot about different things like IRAs and how to invest, and they're pretty basic, beginner friendly advice. And so that's definitely one I would definitely advise people to read. Another one that I really like is called Your Money or Your Life. And I'm not sure if you've read that one. That one's a really great book to get you thinking in terms of money as how it relates to, like making decisions on how you should spend it and not, as in terms of your values. Again, I know I talk a lot about that, but money is really ultimately a way to express your values and to get what you want out of life. And so Your Money or Your Life is a really good book to get you thinking about tracking your money. Why is that important? Getting to think about what you're actually making, like what's your actual income after expenses. And even if you have a 9-to-5 job, there are expenses involved with your job. So those are two books I would really recommend because they're not intimidating, and if there is terminology or jargon, they take the time to really explain it to you.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think people do need to understand that they've got to sit down first and figure out what their values are. What is it that's important to me? And that I think it takes time. 1, 2, it changes over time. So it's not something you can do once and say, these are my values and I'm done. I think over time, you need to carve out space to sit down, and if you're married, to do it with your spouse and say, what's important to us? What are the things that we want, and how do we want to choose to live our life?
And once you know your values and how you want to live, then it's much easier to make those financial decisions, because then a financial decision comes up and you say, that's really nice, but it doesn't fit in with my values. And so it's easier to say no. I think too often people make a yes, no choice. Oh, should I buy this dress? Oh, that looks nice. And then it's a yes or no decision. It's not, should I buy this dress, or should I use the money to what my bigger value is and allocate it there? And I think when you can reframe the decision that way, it's easier to say no to the shiny object in front of you. And I think that's the hardest thing for all of us, is how to ignore the shiny objects.
Yes. Yes, definitely.
Any advice on how to ignore the shiny objects in front of us?
Oh my goodness. I think the very first thing I do, because I caught myself in that a few months ago, was unsubscribe from every single newsletter that would promote any sale. I caught myself buying a few things on a flash sale, and I realized after that I didn't actually want it. I think I was just caught up in the marketing message of it. So that's one. So try to limit yourself. I don't want to call it depriving, but limit yourself as many messages as possible, especially if you know you're going to succumb to them. Secondly, keep a list of things that you will and will not buy. So it can be categories of things. A friend of mine has a really bad habit of buying clothes all the time. So she, on her iPhone, literally has every single piece of clothing that she owns on it. So I think she has pictures and everything. And so whenever she goes out shopping and she's very tempted, she will scroll through the pictures of her clothes and remind herself, hey, I've got this closet full of clothes. This shirt that I want actually looks similar to one I have. And then that just stops her in her tracks. So anything like that reminds you, maybe you don't need this, or maybe you already have a lot of it, can help.
Absolutely. And removing the temptation is probably the most important first step. If you don't walk into the store, you're not going to be tempted. If you get rid of all the emails and the circulars that say, buy this now, and they are designed specifically, the people who are marketing to you have spent billions of dollars to figure out how to make you make decisions that maybe aren't so wise for yourself. So if you can remove all of the things that trigger that buying decision, it really helps. I know I have that. I walk into Costco and I look at the big screen TVs. I'm like, oh, I need a new big screen TV. Then I think about it and go, no, I really don't. And I've been very good at overcoming that one.
Yeah. Another thing I do is also have a picture of something I'm working towards. So one thing I really, really want to do this year is have a family vacation. We haven't had one we haven't had one for almost 2 years now. And so it's a conscious decision of, do we need this, or can I put this $50 towards a family vacation? And sometimes, you're going to forget what your goals are. I do all the time if I'm tired or I'm stressed or whatever. And if I have something that reminds me of it. So I have my desktop image right now is of my 2017 goals outlined. On my phone, I have a picture of the place I want to go to for my family vacation. And so if I'm really tempted to buy something, I will either go to my phone or my computer and look at the list of goals and remind myself, okay, can I spend this? If I do, that's great. But can I spend that money instead towards my family vacation? And that usually does the trick.
So you have written goals.
Yes.
Is that something you do on an annual basis? Is it a larger, how do you do your goal?
How do I do my goals? So something I do I started a new system this year where I have intentions. So I have 5 intentions. I have a financial target. Then I have a timeline for my intentions. So by, September, I will have done this, or by December, this will have happened. And then I will also write down the value that I will deliver as a result of reaching these goals. And it could be personal, it can be business related, it can be whatever. So for example, a value that I will be delivering is consistent and valuable video and written content on my blog. So as a result of achieving certain goals, I will be continue to deliver this value to people, right? And a personal one that I have on this list is the value I'm delivering is having more time to be present for family and friends as a result of whatever goal I'm doing. So it's almost like why and what result are you hoping to achieve with that goal? So that's something I have outlined literally in front of my computer right now. And then I work backwards, like month by month, what can I do step by step, week by week to get to these overarching goals and intentions that I have set.
And I think that's important for people. If you have certain goals that you want to achieve, they need to be written down and they need to be easily accessible so that you're constantly reminding yourself of the direction you're going so that you don't get off track. And then it becomes a much easier decision process. This is what I wanted. This is what I've decided. And now when a decision comes up, it's so easy to say, is it towards the goal or am I being distracted from what I've decided I want to do this year? And then it makes it much easier to not feel guilty, to be able to say yes or no, and to take those intentional, purposeful steps forward.
Yeah, a great story. Her name is Melissa Thomas. I think she's a financial coach as well. And her goal was to see Elton John, I think, at every single Elton John concert. That was her goal. And so she was heavily in debt at the time. And so her reason for getting out of debt was to see Elton John. And so every time, she was frustrated, every time she felt like she wanted to spend money, she would think, do I want to spend money on this? Or do I want to get out of debt so I can see Elton John? So it became a much, much easier decision for her. And when she became debt-free, she made sure then to save her money. Of course, she had to have enough for her family and things like that. But whatever extra money went towards going to see Elton John.
And that's the thing I think people need to realize. You need to figure out your particular area. For her, it was Elton John. Everyone's going to have their own things that they want to do. It's okay if society approves or disapproves or whatever. It's your choice. Be intentional. Figure out what makes you specifically happy. And then just start taking the steps to move in that direction and enjoy it.
Yeah, and it's okay if what you want are shoes. For me, that's not something I value. But if you love the craftsmanship of a shoe, you think they're pieces of art, and that's something you want to buy and collect because you value it and you make a goal towards collecting them, that's cool. Just because what you want may seem like you're a mindless consumer, who cares what other people think? I think it's really, again, figure out what it is that you want. I think the trend now is, I want to buy experiences. I want to go travel. That's my thing. Great. If that's not what you want, who cares about what people are saying about that? For me, I value, security and comfort. I want lots of things for my son. And maybe people don't agree with that. That's fine. But you know what? It's going to make me happy, make my son happy. And that's all that matters.
So how does someone become self-confident enough to say no to everyone else? And I'm sure that in part of doing that, you're going to get comments and you're going to get people saying things to you that aren't supportive. Do you hide those goals, or do you tell people, or do you just not worry about what others say?
I remember when I was in debt and still traveling, I think a lot of people were pretty judgmental about that. And it was really hard for me to even share, where I was going in the world for a little while. And what I found really helped was just sharing with one or two close friends. And then they would go, oh, that's great, Sarah. We support you. We know that you're a go-getter. You're going to achieve whatever you want. And then that gave me a lot more encouragement to keep doing what I wanted to do. And sometimes what happens, and it's happened to me and other people, where some people are just gonna not want to be friends with you anymore, and that's okay. I think you just have to deal with that. I think, if you're starting out doing something that maybe people around you aren't going to agree with, then find somebody else that will initially. Now, you're not trying to find a yes man. That's not it at all. You're just trying to find somebody who will at least support you and say, you know what, great, you're trusting yourself to make a decision. Now, this could be somebody in a Facebook group, this could be on Twitter. It doesn't have to be somebody around you. You can even go into meetup.com and find groups, or gosh, there's so many out there. And just go and share. Sometimes talking with a stranger can be more therapeutic than talking to a friend, which it sounds strange, but it's true.
Well, that's some great advice. You have to surround yourself with people who support you, and that's important. At some point, you may have to cut ties with certain people or just not have those discussions with that particular group of people because you know it's going to cause stress. Mm-hmm. And so you move away from that. Any other things that you've learned that you'd like to share today about how to overcome and change our relationships with money?
I think if there's anything that I want people to take from this conversation and from everything that you share as well is just start small. I think when you have a big lofty goal, you get overwhelmed thinking all the things you have to do. Don't worry about that. Literally just look at the next step you have to take. When you complete that step, then say, what is my next step after that? And then you're going to find that your big lofty goal will be achieved.
So small steps, one step after the other, figure out your bigger purpose. What's my goal? What direction am I going? And then what step can I take today to get closer to that goal? And once you have that, it's easier. It's easier to get rid of the noise and all of the things that will prevent you from getting there because you've got clear direction, you know where you're going, and you just keep taking those small little steps. And sometimes things don't work out, and that's okay. You just get back up and you continue down the path, and it works.
Yes, exactly.
Awesome. So you blog over at highfivingdollars.com. If people want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, definitely head over to the website. I have on the very top navigation bar, there should be a link that says Ask Sarah a question. So you can go ahead and ask me anything there. Sometimes I feature questions on my weekly video series. So you may see your question answered on video. Yeah, that's the best way to reach me.
Awesome. And I encourage everyone to check out her website and see what she's doing. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Once again, we see the same themes coming through. Having a purpose, being intentional, setting goals and working toward them, small baby steps in a systematic way that propel us toward whatever it is that we find important in our life. Trying out experiments to see how it works for us and just continuing down the path. If you need a coach or want help, or if you have a question, please don't hesitate and reach out to me. Rocky@richersoul.com. Don't forget to check out Sarah's site, highfivingdollars.com. She has some great free resources for you. Thanks for listening today.